Well, good morning. I am Al Paul, and as you know, I'm one of the support analysts. Probably have talked to most of you over the past few years, and I'm very pleased to be here today to do something we haven't exactly done before. Now, we have presented on creating next year, and last spring we did a series on rollovers. But today, we're going to concentrate on just next year's tracks, grades, and statuses. And what we want to do is provide you with a series of what we have tested and what we have learned to be best practices. We had some ideas about filling out the next year fields when we did a similar webinar in December, but we realized it's a pretty busy time of the year. And many folks may not have been looking ahead to next year's scheduling back in December. So here we are again, talking about setting ourselves up for next year, in part in next year's scheduling, but very specifically for next year for the year-end rollover. Why are we talking about best practices? Because we're talking about we really want to get your next year rollover to function the way you want it to and the way we want it to. And we had a little trouble there with our display, and now I'm having a little trouble getting my computer's attention. And I want to, I'm having a little trouble getting my PowerPoint across to your side of the screen. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to restart my PowerPoint. And I'm going to ask you to bear with me here for just a second. Beautiful. You should now be looking at my lighthouse. And we'll restart the PowerPoint and bring that across. I've got two monitors where I can run the PowerPoint on one side and I can show it to you on the other side. You should now be looking at my PowerPoint again. Beautiful. A little housekeeping before we go a little farther. You know how this kind of works. We're going to run on mute today because the audio works better. Questions will be handled after the session, not during. If you have a question, email it to our support staff like any other question. That way you're helping us manage the questions and help us ensure that we do follow up correctly. By the way, I should be able to get you out of here today in well less than an hour. We are recording this session today. Thankfully, I still haven't been given a webcam, so you're only going to get the presentation itself, including audio, and they'll be posted in the usual spot, community.schoollogic.com. And this is a very important underpinning to what we're going to cover today. Last week, I went to the community pages, community.schoollogic.com. You guys know the address. And I went to the downloads and docs page, and I posted this PDF. And this is the PDF upon which today's webinar is based. If you look under the header, Best Practices, you'll see next year creation. And in fact, I just reposted this morning. This is a shot from a little bit ago. Just this morning, I put up the latest, greatest version of this because my author, my coworker, Julie Clifford, had made some changes to this document. It's up there now. This is a really, really nice piece of work, and it is the piece of work around which today's presentation is constructed. For our display purposes today, we're going to be using SchoolLogic 4.1.6. I know some of you have that installed. I know some of you haven't put it in yet. SERS 4 has many of these same steps, but I must tell you, if you're a hybrid client, and by that I mean one of the places where you guys use SERS for some things and use SchoolLogic for others, we highly, highly recommend all the work you see today be completed in SchoolLogic or else in SERS. But I'm telling you, start on one side of the house and stay there for the whole process. Don't be going back and forth because this involves, there's an involved series of steps here. This, in my mind, what I'm going to show you today in a school would play out over a period of days or maybe a couple weeks. This whole business of setting up next year tracks, grades, and statuses. You'll see later, we're going to suggest to you that you have your individual buildings do this in a very specific order. And I would see something like that playing out over the course of a few days, or maybe starting this week and finishing next week. So during the steps, the number of steps the process takes, I'm going to say start on one side of the house, stay on that side of the house. And hey, can I digress here for just a minute? Now remember, I promised I'll have you out of here in under an hour, even with the digression I'm about to make. But because I'm going to tell you something here about 4.1.6, which has nothing to do with next year or rollover, but I think it's pretty important. Those of you who have installed 4.1.6 may have noticed that we changed how student protection works. In the new version, you get a lot more choices. Students can have multiple protection records. All of the records are tied to dates, which dictate when the protection shield comes up. We meet a bunch of PASI requirements for our friends in Alberta. We also have written a script which moves what used to be called protection comments into the new area where they're called restriction details. Now, as you can see from this screenshot, when you set it up properly, the protection shield really does jump up, and you really do see the protection comment. Protection records, the new ones, look like the background of this screenshot, okay? Got my protection type, that's new. You didn't used to have protection codes, now we do. You have an effective date and an expiry date. That shield I showed you on the previous screen, he comes up between these dates. And then what used to be called protection comments, in other words, why is the kid protected, they come up now as restriction details. And you'll notice that that really does still print, okay? Covers up the kid. Now, out in the lookup values, not the lookup values, but what this screen is this screen is the individual kid's record, okay? This is what it looks like as you enter it, if you enter it from scratch, okay? Now, here's why I'm bringing this up today in this webinar. Today or tomorrow, we are sending you an email on this very topic. If you haven't read it, I don't know when management was going to send it out. I actually wrote part of it, but I don't know when they're going to send it out. When they send it out, get it, read it. Hey, I'm the guy who writes the release notes around this place. Nobody bothered to tell me we were changing how this works. Our current challenge is, in 4.1.6, in this new way of handling student protection, the old method of having that shield come up on students doesn't work anymore. So all of your student protection information is still in SchoolLogic. It's not gone anywhere. But when you click on a protected student, the shield no longer pops up. Now, the email we're sending you this week explains that. It explains how to get the shield working together. I wrote that part. And it explains how to transfer your protection information from the old fields to the new fields. We use SQL for that. You do not have to rekey all of your student protection comments. I wrote that part of it too, okay? I personally wrote almost all the instructions that are in that email, and I can guarantee that if you follow them, the student protection shields pop up again just as you expect. I'm sorry about the fact we didn't tell this to you up front when we sent out 4.1.6. I've had a few internal conversations, and I don't think that's going to happen again. Anyway, thanks for permitting me that digression. I felt the topic was kind of important. Now, usually at this point in one of these webinars, I would give you a little outline of what we're going to discuss. This time around, I want to begin by telling you what we are not going to discuss. We are not here to discuss actually scheduling your students for 2014-2015. 40 minutes from now, you are not going to know how to actually formulate a school schedule. We are going to touch briefly on the first part of creating next year, and then we're going to spend an awful lot of time on this page. Next year tracks, grades, and statuses. We have come up with some practices that we believe are worthy of dissemination, and I'm the guy who's doing the disseminating. So, where does this all start? well, let's go over here to SchoolLogic. And in SchoolLogic, now many of you, I expect, have already done this. By the middle of March, you've probably already done this. But sometime back, you went to scheduling. You went to next year's scheduling. Take a second for that to build in. Somebody's got to wake up the computer. And when you got here, you went to create next year, right? Okay. Now, sometime back, you made all these, and you actually clicked yes here. And at each of your buildings, even if you only have little kids and don't schedule them into classes, you need to do this. The point of me coming and showing this to you today is, in previous webinars, when I showed you this step, what was it that I was emphatic about? What did I really hit you over the head with? Remember, I preached that you cannot create NY tracks, that is to say next year tracks, on your own. You must come in here and do it this way. Because when you say create next year and then you click yes, those are the steps that literally create the tracks for next year. It allows the system to create next year tracks. Because I guarantee you that if you create next year tracks manually, you're not just failing to follow a best practice. You're setting yourself up for guaranteed error messages down the road. And then pretty soon I'm getting emails and I'm getting phone calls. So where does that take you? Well, the next place you go is you go to tracks. And the fact that I previously, before I got involved with you guys on the phone today, I previously followed through on that step. I had clicked yes. I got an NYR track. Now this example right here is about as simple as it gets. This happens to be a high school. They only have one track. When I say create next year, I get a copy of that one track, copy advanced with dates for next year. Okay? So simple. That's how we create next year. And I'm sure that the vast majority of you guys have already done that. You used the system to create next year, and during that process, you created valid next year tracks. Now we're getting down to what I really want to discuss today, which is this screen, next year tracks, grades, and statuses. We know at SchoolLogic that if a certain series of events happens on this screen, you will end up with, potentially, tons of blank records after you do your demographic rollover this summer. And then I get emails and I get phone calls. This whole presentation today is designed so that I personally get fewer emails and phone calls. You know that, right? I don't like emails and phone calls because that means you're having trouble. Now, hey, don't worry about my job security because I'm going to night courses and I'm learning how to spy on you for the NSA. So don't worry about that. But seriously, my teammates and I want things to go smoothly for you. So they send me out here with some notes to help you out. Now, the first recommendation we've always made on this page is you should have your buildings fill this out. Not a district person, your buildings. Now, I know that that can create some challenges. What if a building's sending its students on to another building this summer? For instance, a middle school that would send graduated 8th graders to your high school. What if they have not yet filled out this form? Well, that means the high school people will neither be able to fill this form out themselves correctly, nor will they have next year's 9th graders available to them in SchoolLogic. But hey, we got a plan for that. And the plan is, step number 1, making your building people do this form. Step number 2 is making sure your building people fill this out in order. And by order, I don't mean left to right on this screen. I mean begin with your elementary schools, then work with your middle schools, then work with your high schools. This fashion, this order, allows the intake schools, the receiving schools, these guys and these guys, to populate the required next year fields for the incoming pre-registered students. Until these guys hit submit, these guys won't have incoming 6th graders, let's say, to work with. And until these guys hit submit, these guys won't have incoming, let's say, 9th graders to work. Okay? Let's think of this a little farther. Let's say your elementary ends at grade 5. Your elementary operator gives her 5th grade students a next year's school of the middle school. Once she submits that form, that makes those 5th graders available as potential 6th graders for the middle school or schools. Same thing happens at the middle school. This staff member declares this year's 8th graders have a next year school of the high school. Now your high school counselors can plan for next year's 9th grade enrollment numbers. Now, by the way, this is one of those parts where we've observed if you do this out of order, you can end up with bogus records after rollover, just so you know. If populating next year fields is not completed in the ascending order you see here, elementary's first, then middle school, then high school, if you don't do that, it's critical that your fields are reviewed and, where necessary, populated through global update or one at a time, mess with the kids, prior to running your next year demographic rollover, your year-end demographic rollover. Now, if this whole thing of schools working in order doesn't make a lot of sense to you logistically, please let me suggest something like this. You give your elementaries a window of a certain number of days. I don't know how many days. Give them a window. They have until the close of business next Wednesday, okay, to do their part. Then the window opens for the middle schools. They get a certain number of days, and then their window closes, and then the window opens for the high school, okay, something like that. I'm not going to give you a specific number of days. You guys are logisticians on your end. Figure it out. How many days you allow is basically a function of how many buildings you have, and I'll let you guys work out the details. Now, the number of students in each school really doesn't affect these windows of opportunities unless you had tons of tracks in each school, okay? Because what affects how long it takes a school to fill that out? Well, how many tracks do you have? But how many students do you have? I'm going to suggest 3. Wait. I don't mean that you have 3 total students. I mean you have 3 types of students. 3 types. No, I don't mean types like this. I mean types like this. Okay? There are continuing students. A lot of places call them returning students. There are students who are leaving your building but staying within your district, and then students who are leaving your district altogether. So for the purposes of next year tracks, grades, and statuses, we care about these 3 types of kids. And this is how we're going to approach your choices on the next year tracks, grades, and statuses window. So let's talk first about continuing or returning students. Now, if we go back here, well, let's just run up here real quick. On a next year tracks, grades, and statuses screen, I got 5 slots. I got 5 different pieces of information here. Okay? Continuing students, I am going to fill out 4 of them. No other kid, well, from an individual building's perspective, that's the most I mess with is 4. But let's not worry about how many they are. Let's worry about what they are. Okay? So let's, in status, okay, what's that mean? That means remember, we're talking about continuing students. Let's pretend that we are all operators at an elementary, okay? The NYR in status is going to be, what is this kid's in status for next fall, keeping in mind they're coming back to me. They are continuing students. So at my elementary, it's the 5th graders that move on. So for everybody younger than 5th grade, what NYR in status do I want them to have? And remember, I fill this out by track, okay? For my continuing students, what will their NYR grade be? Okay, I get to assign generally 1 grade above where they are now. NYR track, what is their track for next year? And then the final one, the easy one, because they're continuing students, what's their NYR school? It's the current school, okay? So if they're returning to you, next year's school must obviously be the same as this year's school. Here's my elementary. Let's talk about those continuing students. Every grade except the 5th grade happens to be continuing students. Okay? That's why every grade except 5th grade has the 4 areas that I talked about filled in. We talked about in status, grade level, track, school. Notice it's only the students who are leaving me who are filled out differently. Now, let's see how they work. This is the most complex part. This is the most complex slide I'm going to show you the whole day. Okay? This happens to be my 2nd largest group of students on my campus, right? The largest group, the majority of the kids in my building, they're coming back to me. Okay? That's true at almost every building. The 2nd largest group of students is the kids who are leaving my building, but they're staying within my district. Okay? And this is the group where we have definitely come up with some best practice ideas. As we remember, there are 5 pieces of information, but I am not going to fill out all 5 of them. Okay? Remember, I'm an elementary operator. I'm worried about my 5th graders. Or I'm a middle school operator, and I'm talking about my 8th graders. Okay? I am the outgoing school. So as the outgoing school, I only have to do 2 things. I am going to populate their NYR out status, and by that we mean what's the status by which they're going to leave the building this spring. And then I'm going to fill in the NYR school. Okay? This is huge. Okay? As an outgoing school, as either the middle school in this equation or the elementary school in this equation, I'm going to fill in out status, I'm going to fill in school for the kids leaving the building. Remember, I already took care of all the other kids. These continuing students, I took care of them. Now I'm taking care of these guys. And when I'm done with these guys, I'm going to hit submit. Right down here, it's off of the screen, but you guys are all SchoolLogic operators. You know where it is. There's a submit button down here. Nothing happens in SchoolLogic until you hit submit. Once I do that, by filling in an NYR school, I have now essentially pre-registered these kids at the next building. I have made them available for the next building to work with. Okay? So that's huge. Even though this is the only group of students for which we advocate filling in all 5 pieces of information, me as an outgoing school, I don't really have that much work to do. I set the student up with an explanation of how they're going to leave the school and where they're going next year. So my elementary school, he's going to look like this. Here's my 5th graders. I'm going to set them up with an out status, how they're leaving my school this year and where they're going next year. Okay? We said the outgoing school fills in a reason for them leaving, and then in my particular one, for those of you who are not sitting really, really close to your monitors, this happens to say graduated to OMS. Now, OMS is my middle school. And we give them that school for next year. Here it is, SL Middle. Okay? Well, fine and good. The elementary, now, because I've filled in all my continuing students, that's all these other pieces, I can hit submit. My elementary work is done. I get my work done in my allotted days, and I'm making these 5th graders available to the middle school. If you're sitting really, really close to your monitor, you might notice that the elementary operator did fill in next year grade. You can't expect that that's going to happen. It depends on how security is set up on the grade legends, frankly. Some elementary operators will be able to see grade 6, some will not. Okay, if she fills it in, great. It's not going to wreck anything. In some districts, she won't be able to see that. Now, for the 2nd or 3rd time today, let me digress for another moment. Because I want to answer a question we sometimes get on the help desk. Suppose I had 2 middle schools, right? I'm the elementary operator, and I don't know that all of my kids are going to one middle school. In fact, I know for a fact that my elementary kids who are graduating are going to go to 2 different middle schools. Some of my kids are going to go to Obama Middle School, and other 5th graders from my building are going to go to Redford Middle School. Although I understand overnight that maybe we aren't going to name schools after Redford in Alberta anymore. But when I wrote this PowerPoint, Redford was still the premier in Alberta. So how would I set that up as an elementary operator? Well, my answer, because I'm not that smart but I'm lazy, would be I'm going to figure out which building is going to get the majority of my students. And 51% is all it takes. So if 51% of my students are going to Redford, I would make Redford my next year's school right here for all my 5th graders. And then as soon as I submit this, I would go over to Global Assign, and I would assign the Obama students to their NYR school. When I go into Global Assign, all of the students would have been forwarded, as it were, to Redford when I go in there initially. Then I would select the kids designated for Obama, and I'd use Global Assign to make that move. Now, if you tune me out for that last paragraph, maybe because you don't have any situations where there's any questions about where your students are going, tune into this little nugget here. This is kind of cool. If I'm a middle school operator, and this student here, Kyle's an 8th grader, right? He's going to the high school next year, okay? I've already submitted, okay? Back here, I liked everything I was doing. I hit submit. Now, when I go to the student menu and I go to the student next year tracks, right? It's like the 2nd or 3rd element on the student menu. Notice that because I have already submitted the next year tracks, grades, and statuses form, when I come into this kid's page, I cannot edit it. You and I are all used to seeing the word edit down here, where this maroon circle is. It's not there. The reason it's not there is because once I assign an NYR school and I submit that, this student's NYR fields, in effect, belong to the next school. I cannot get edit inside this circle. Now, don't sweat the other details, okay? Because some of you just said to yourself, oh gosh, does this mean I can't edit any of Kyle's information? The answer is no. You can still edit. Well, depending upon how you ask the question. The deal is you can still edit Kyle's other information. You just can't edit his next year information. Okay? Now, I'm logged in as the high school operator. Notice up here it says I'm the high school operator. Here's Kyle. He's the same kid. He's still in grade level 8, right? We're in the spring of the year. How did I get to him? I went to student demographics, and I said, show me the next year kids. That's how I got him. Notice I can edit, okay? Once the middle school operator made my school the NYR school, and the middle school operator submitted that choice, me, the high school operator, was granted control of these kids' NYR fields, okay? So that's pretty cool. But you got to think ahead about how that's going to work. And that's one of the reasons we want everything to be done in order. Now, let me digress just one more step here. Those of you who are sitting really, really close to your monitors, you can see NYR type, NYR start date, and NYR end date. Okay? Because why? Because I'm in SchoolLogic 4.1.6. If you are also in SchoolLogic 4.1.6, ignore these. Do not worry about these guys right here. These are part of PASSE. We're still working on our PASSE acceptance. We're working with the Alberta education people. It seems like almost every day. And these are fields which I think in 4.2.2 will probably go away. We will probably hide them until you really need them. You don't quite need them just yet. Now, let's go back to my Obama Redford example, right? Because I said make all your kids be Redford kids because that's more than 51% of where your kids are going. And then I wanted you to go back to Global Assign, and I wanted you to go to the student menu, pick Global Update. Here I am in Global Update. I come down here to Select Field. I pick NYR School, and then I pick the high school or the middle school. In this case, it would have been Obama. That's my second school. My kid's going to get fewer kids. Global Assign will still work for the middle school operator even though she can't edit this field one at a time. So just because the middle school operator assigned the kid to the high school, and just because what that means is she cannot edit those fields individually, she can still go into Global Update and edit them. Why might she want to do that? Well, like I said in my example, if her outgoing students are not all going to the same school, she may want to do something like this within her window of time before it's time to pass these kids along. Now, let's return to my middle school. And for the first time, I can tell by looking. First thing is, I can tell by looking that what my elementary operators have done. I can tell they've done what they were supposed to. Remember, the grade level here at the far left, by the way, is always this year's grade level. So this year's fifth graders are showing up in my middle school, on the middle school operator, as pre-registered. How did they get here? Well, here's their in status. I would have to do this, right, because I'm the middle school person. The elementary person is not going to be able to see what the kid's in status is going to be down the road for next fall, okay? The out status, I'm going to leave that blank because, you know what, the elementary person filled that in, right? Okay? But what's cool about this, if you do this in order, like we preach, if the elementary people have done their job right, when I come in as middle school operator, here are my fifth graders, they show up as pre-registered. Okay? I think that is just way cool. Now let's look at them first. We said that when kids move within the district, the outgoing school only has to choose the NYR out status and choose the next year's school. So I don't have to worry about those two areas, me, the middle school operator. You can see here on the far right that, yeah, I filled this in, but it's the same information. He's still coming to the middle school. Okay, no harm, no foul. As a middle school operator, I would then fill in what you see here. I would fill in the in status, I would fill in the grade level, and I would fill in the track. Even if my elementary operator can maybe do this, she's never going to be able to see the middle school tracks. Okay, so I'm going to do that. Now, one row above the fifth graders, that's the current eighth graders. Remember, left side, current year grade. The current year grade level is 8. Their current track is the 8th grade track. Now, these are kids that are what? They're leaving my building, but they're staying within my district. So I give them the two things just like the elementary people did. I give them graduated to OHS. That's my high school. So I give them an out status for the spring of this year, and I give them an NYR school. Yeah, I gave them the grade level, and you're right, I didn't have to do that. But in my security setup, I do get to see the grade level for next year, okay? The only fields that we recommend that you assign to students leaving your building, but staying within the district, are the out status and the next year's school, okay? It's not going to hurt anything to throw in the grade. Now, depending upon how things are set up in your world, you might not be able to assign another school's grade, and you're definitely not going to be able to assign another school's track. And then these top two kids, those are returning tracks. My current 6th graders, my current 7th graders, they're returning to me. Remember, they're the only ones where I fill in 4 pieces of information. Now we go to the high school, just for a second, to see what the high school's going to do with those 8th graders. Here come the 8th graders at the bottom of the form. And just like my 5th graders showed up in my middle school, my 8th graders are showing up in my high school. They're pre-registered because my middle school did their job correctly. So for those kids, I'm going to do what's their in status. What's the high school code for them getting into my building next fall? What grade do I want them in next fall? What track do I want them in for next fall? And oh yeah, really, seriously, they're coming to my building, okay? You see, of course, that out status is empty because in my little chart in the high school office, it says the outgoing school handles an out status. Well, I'm not the outgoing school, okay? Simple. Now, as the high school person, I have to fill in 3 of the 5 for these kids, right? I filled in NYRN status, I filled in grade level, I filled in track, okay? Makes total sense because middle school doesn't have access to the high school tracks. So the incoming 8th graders, they get about 60% of the data filled in by me. Which brings us to our final type. Remember, we had 3 types of students. Here's my final type. Students who are leaving my building and leaving my district. Okay? This is absolutely the smallest number of students I have in my 3 types, right? I have continuing students, I have kids who are leaving my building but staying within my district, and then I have this third and final group, kids who are leaving my building and leaving the district. I'm the high school operator. I'm the only one that's going to have this, right? Okay? I will give those kids an NYR out status. I am the outgoing school. I'm the high school. I give them an out status. It's graduated or whatever it is, and that's the only thing I have to fill in. I give them graduated. I tell them not to let the door hit them in the fanny as they're leaving. That's it. That's what my high school looks like. It looks like this. Here's my current year 12th graders. These are the kids we just talked about. We're going to give them a graduated status. Boom. That's all I care about. That's it. My continuing students, 9th, 10th, 11th graders, they're all coming back to me. Remember, they get 4 things in status grade level track school. Simple. I love the kids who are leaving because they're not very hard to fill out. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the nitty and the gritty of our suggestions for best practices in filling out this form. Now, as you might expect, I've got a couple other thoughts as well. It is important to understand that unless this entire page is repopulated with the correct information, run this process only once per building. If you run the process a second time with only the changes entered, which kind of seems like it would be logical, you actually are submitting the entire page, not just the changes. Okay? That means that manual changes that you may have made in between times will be overwritten. Okay? So we advocate that each building only do this once. Here's another best practice. Resist the temptation to slip next year fields onto your students' regular demographics pages. We gave you an entire page for this. Go to the student menu and pick next year tracks, grades, and statuses. Okay? Keep all of your next year information on the form we gave you. They are all here. They're in one place. It's very convenient, and it does free up screen real estate on the other forms. You could now put something else there. Okay? Like all other student demographic fields, I'm required to inform you that if you place a piece of information here, what did they use here? They use next year track, next year grade, school, and track. Here's grade, here's school, here's track. If you put any piece of student demographic information, 2 different parts in my software, I cannot guarantee that if you make the change in one place, it'll show up in the other. So that's another reason, put all your stuff in this one place. And by the way, oh, I already gave you a little hint, right? I already told you if you're running 4.1.6, you can ignore these 3. Yeah, we'll make those go away pretty soon. After you have your schools go through all of this process, we recommend each school should confirm the accuracy of student next year fields. You do this after all of the schools have completed submitting NYR fields, so you do it now, right? And then we would recommend you do it one more time prior to running the year-end demographic rollover. Correct any entry of next year fields because it's critical to have the correct data in order to do a successful demographic rollover. In fact, that's the major reason I called you guys together today. So, how do you verify? Well, you could go to the screen I showed you last, to the students next year screen, okay? And you could review a cross-section of all your grades, right? You look at students that fall into each of those 3 types. You look at a bunch of continuing students, you look at a bunch of students who are leaving you but staying within your district, and then you look at a bunch of kids that are going to graduate. That'd be one way to do it. Another method would be, why don't you create a user-defined report which shows the pieces of information that are important to you? Now, about 30 minutes ago, I told you I had a document up on the web around which this whole webinar was built. Remember? Next year creation, okay? Page 6 of this document shows you how to create the user-defined report. And page 6 and page 7 go on to show you how you could export data from that report into Excel. Oh, once you get the data in Excel, you can really filter it, you can sort it, and you can see, do you have the right stuff in the right places? Okay, my teammate Julie Clifford made this document. She's really terrific. It's a terrific document. Okay, everybody take a breath. In fact, give me a hit of water right here. Thank you for the timeout. Those were the best practices which we've refined over the past few weeks and months, and wanted to show them to you because I want your scheduling to go smoothly this spring, and I want your rollover to go really smoothly this summer. Now, you guys are all in education, right? And what are we going to do next? We're going to review, okay? What are the best practices that Al told us in the last, 45 minutes? Well, we started out 45 minutes ago. We created next year. We showed that step. Remember, that's a step which creates tracks. It also creates master boards. Today, for today's discussion, we don't care about master boards, okay? We care about you guys having tracks which are valid, and then the way you got them was you created them through this Create Next Year process. Then we went into next year tracks, grades, and statuses, and what was the first big best practice Al talked about? Hey, every school fills out their own. Start with your elementaries. Work toward the high school. That's a new concept. Not everybody has talked about that previously. For the kids who are continuing, and by continuing I mean at my building, I only have to fill in the in status, the grade, the track, and the school. If they're leaving my building but staying within the district, it gets even easier. I just fill in their out status, and I give them a school to go to for next year. Now, the intake school, right, the school who's going to get my 5th graders or get my 8th graders, they give them an NY in status. That's how are they getting into my building in the fall. And that intake school handles the grade and the track. If you break the responsibilities down according to the way we've designed it, it works. For students leaving the district, really simple. Give them an out status, pat them on the back, tell them have a nice day. Keep your NY data on the one page, okay? It frees up space, and remember, if you store something in 2 different places, I cannot guarantee you that both places will change when you change one of them. And then the very final thing we talked about today is we talked about verify, verify, verify. You should do a report now once you've made these submissions and you've done all that, and then you should do a report later, like when you're getting warmed up to do the rollover. Okay? Now, wait. Al gave us a whole bunch of new stuff today, and Al said, these are the best practices, and Al said, if you do it this way, it's going to work. Well, but what about my school? And I've already done this. I've been here. I've done this. Ladies and gentlemen, no worries. Okay? It's going to be okay. We're not telling you to go back and do everything again. You folks, the folks that have already done this, okay, I'm going to tell you 2 things. A, we want you to be especially vigilant about verifying your data. I really do recommend you go to the community pages, you download Julie's document, and you follow the directions for the user-defined report, export the data into Excel if you like, make sure your kids have the information they need in the right parts. You can look at the charts on this PowerPoint. Remember, this PowerPoint will be up on the internet by, well, not the Power. I could put the PowerPoint up there, I suppose, but the PowerPoint by itself isn't as valuable as the recording of this whole event. But the charts I made in here where I said intake school does this, outgoing school does this, those charts are taken directly from Julie's documents, okay? So if you have Julie's documents, you will see which group of the 3 groups does the student fall into, and therefore which piece of information should the student have, okay? So we advocate. Check that now. Check it again in June or July just before you do your rollover, and you guys should be good to go. Then the second thing I would tell you, if you've already done these steps, is I want you to follow these directions next year, okay? Follow our best practices from the start next year. You should be golden. Remember, I put that help document up there on our webpage already, plus this presentation here that you're listening to right now. This is going to go up over the weekend. Where does all that stuff go up? Community.schoollogic.com. In the meantime, I urge you to stay out of the ditches. I wish you smooth trails ahead, and thank you so very much for attending today. Really glad you stopped by today. I hope you found this valuable. I hope you have a terrific afternoon. Thank you, and goodbye.